Needle roller thrust bearings are used on racing engine crankshafts to reduce wear and extend engine life under brutal conditions.
I'm Pat Courtney with JTech, and we're going to learn about needle roller thrust bearings and cylindrical roller thrust bearings. What is a needle roller? Well, a needle roller is basically an elongated cylindrical roller. So when the length of that roller becomes 4 times longer than the diameter is, that becomes a needle roller from a cylindrical roller. So if you think of a short, squat roller, that's going to be more of a cylindrical roller. As it gets thinner, it becomes a needle roller. One of the other distinguishing features is the ends of those rollers are typically machined with a cylindrical roller. So they're going to finish the ends of those rollers. Now, when we talk about thrust bearings, thrust bearing is just this cage and rollers, or it could actually have integrated washers. So the washers look like this, and they're going to be what's on either side of the thrust bearing itself. Now, if you're not going to use washers, if you're going to, let's say, have the end of the shaft, so you're going to have a step on a shaft, push on that roller, push on those rollers, the ends of that shaft has to be machined and ground, and it has to be heat treated. So whatever surface that these rollers touch, again, has to be a smooth and hard surface. It also has to be flat, as we relate it to needle thrust bearings. So the different designs, you can get the bearing by itself. You can get it with one washer. Actually, you can get it integrated with just one washer, where the washer is actually attached to the bearing. Or you can get it integrated where the washer is on, you got 2 washers that are integrated to the bearing. So you have 3 different ways of getting this product. Now you can buy these washers separately. So these washers are also part of the thrust bearing product, and we have matching washers that go with all of our different thrust bearings. So this cage material is going to be made out of a low carbon case carburized steel. So again, it's got to be case carburized because those rollers are going to be banging against that cage. So it's got to be heat treated, and it's going to be made out of low carbon steel so we can stamp those holes in it without tearing the material. So, and again, those cages are made on very high volume, very precise presses. So what's critical on a needle thrust bearing is these pockets and how well we space them and how parallel they are and how they protrude from the center, okay? So those are very precise. If those cage pockets aren't precise, what will end up happening is those rollers will skid and they won't roll. And we want our rolling elements to always roll. If they skid, then it shears the lube film and the bearings will fail. So those rollers are all, again, like all of our other needle rollers, are going to be made out of 52-100 steel. Now the loose washers, these are going to be made out of what we call 1074 material. Now 1074, like 52-100, has carbon in it, but not as much carbon, and it's also going to be through hardened. So in these, when we stamp them, it's a finished part. Now, some of the thicker ones, so when we get to a washer that's really thick, we might end up grinding the faces of those to get them to the right thickness. But most of these washers are going to be stamped. And if you look at some of these designs with the integrated ones, you can see that we're actually curling over, we're bending that metal over. So again, this material has to be flexible enough to be able to be bent over. So we can't use super high carbon steel to do that. We have to use a lower carbon, not a low carbon steel, but lower carbon than 52-100. So these washers that you can buy individually, you can buy those with different widths. So if you look at the ends here, you can see how this washer is thin and this one's thicker. So you can buy these in multiple widths. Why would you want a thicker washer? It depends on how much load that you're putting on the bearing. It also depends on what that washer is backing up to. So if that washer is not backing up to a nice flat or it's not supported all the way across the full length of the washer, you're going to want a thicker washer depending on how much loads. Again, these are all designed for axial loads, no radial loads. So we can't put a load on the ends of this bearing. So this bearing will sit at the end of the shaft, and the shaft will have a step on it, and it's going to push against these rollers. So it's going to push on this area and rotate. Now the cylindrical roller thrust bearings, they come as a cage and roller assembly, And then they also come with washers as well. So, but they don't have any integrated designs where you can get the washers and the bearing all together. So inside of this piece right here is actually one of these bearings, is the actual cage and roller bearing. With the cylindrical roller thrust bearings, you can get it as the cage and roller, just the cage and roller bearing assembly, or you can get it with two 52-100 rollers. Unlike the needle product, those washers are not going to be made out of 1074. They're going to be made out of 52-100. Because you're using cylindrical rollers, it means that the loads are going to be a lot higher and that those races are going to be a lot thicker, and they're going to be able to use 52-100. They're going to have to machine those and grind them. So the cage itself is very similar. It can be made out of a low carbon steel, or it can be made out of a polymer type cage. So some of the lighter duty stuff is going to be made out of the polymer cage. Cage and roller assembly, you can buy it with the washers and the bearing together, but not integrated. So they'll come in the same box, basically. The cylindrical roller thrust product, higher priced than the needle thrust bearings. Why? Because these are produced in much lower volumes. So the volumes are a lot lower, and the product can't be stamped. A lot of this product has to be machined. So whenever you start machining and grinding, the costs go up, and obviously when the volumes go down, the costs go up as well. But they are capable of much higher thrust loads. So when you go to a cylindrical roller, you're going to have a bigger rolling element, which means higher load capability. So again, just like the needle thrust product though, it can't take any radial loads. So what are the bearing and washer sizes? So the needle product, on the inch needle thrust bearings, you can go from a 1/4 inch bore all the way up to a 4 1/8 inch bore. On the metric needle thrust product, you can go from 8mm bore all the way to 160mm bore. So on the cylindrical product, on the inch cylindrical product, you start at about 1 1/8 and you only go up to about a 3 1/8 inch bore. You start at a larger size because these are cylindrical rollers, so you're looking at a heavy duty application. So on the metric side, you go from 15mm bore all the way up to a 90mm bore. So, and again, those are going to be the cylindrical roller type. Why use a needle or cylindrical roller thrust bearing? Thin cross section, high thrust loads, right? So it's used in devices with tight spaces. It's similar to the drawn cup, but instead of this way, it's this way. So we're taking a load that's parallel to the shaft. So we're trying to push this shaft through this bearing. And so that's what's going to put that thrust load on top of this bearing. And again, it's used in devices that have very thin cross section. It's inexpensive if it's the smaller sizes because they're made on high volume presses. The cylindrical roller design are used for very high axial loads. And again, they require a small cross section. Where are these needle roller thrust bearings and cylindrical roller thrust bearings used? Well, the highest volume, the largest user of these are automatic transmissions, whether it be in cars or trucks, and that's for these fully integrated type needle thrust bearings. So about 90% of all needle thrust bearings that are made are used in either automatic transmissions or torque converters. So other applications include hydraulic pumps, augers, industrial valves, consumer products, adjustable desks. So those automatic adjustable desks have a ball screw in it with a little needle thrust bearing at the top. Exercise equipment. The cylindrical roller product, so the heavier duty stuff are going to go into heavy duty swivels, which are swivel would be like two cables, and you're trying to swivel one cable and hold the other one fixed. So in between those, whatever that little torpedo is like cut in half, it's going to have a thrust bearing in the middle there, and that's going to be able to take that pull on that cable in that thrust direction. They're also used in heavy duty pumps. So one, how does a thrust bearing work and where do you typically see it? Well, from a consumer product, it might be a Lazy Susan, has a thrust bearing on it and allows that table to spin. If you look at a merry-go-round, so that merry-go-round is going around in a circle, it's got a big thrust bearing underneath there. Now, those are special type of thrust bearings, but where we see the most of them, obviously, is in your automatic transmissions. So just like a bicycle has a number of gears, an automatic transmission has a number of gears inside of it. And so for each one of those gears, there's going to be some sort of thrust load that's generated because they typically use helical type gears, which puts a thrust load on the shaft. So for every one of those gears, you're going to have one of these thrust bearings next to it. So if it's a 10-speed transmission, It's going to have 10 gears. It's going to have 10 thrust bearings. That would be some typical applications where you'd find this product. So in summary, the needle roller thrust product, it's a power-dense bearing solution for high thrust capacity, thin cross-section, low cost if you're talking about the needle thrust product because it's made on high volume presses, a wide breadth of products. So not only do we make the inch product, but there's metric product as well. And then there's the heavy duty cylindrical roller thrust product, which is capable of very high axial loads, much higher priced because everything's machined, low volume. It's available with or without matching washers. So all the product is available with these matching washers if you're not going to use a fully integrated product or you can't afford to machine your housing bore and your shaft to take those needle rollers or cylindrical rollers.
Thank you for watching our overview of needle roller thrust bearings and cylindrical roller thrust bearings. Stay tuned for more bearing training from J-Tech, formerly known as Koyo.